All right, we're live. I'm with Alex Svetsky, the co-founder at Amber and the host of the Wake Up podcast. Alex, appreciate you jumping on, man.
Yo, Chris, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, really appreciate the time. We always want to make sure that the streams are live. Should be live on YouTube and on LinkedIn. If you guys are tuning in, thanks for the time and jumping on. Let us know where you're coming from in chat. As usual, if you have a question or comment throughout, we will pull them up on stream. But I really appreciate you guys jumping on. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Alex, can you give a quick background about yourself? We're going to talk just a little bit about Bitcoin today. So I know I get a ton of questions. It's like nonstop, especially over the last 3 or 4 months. So been looking forward to the conversation. So a little background and we'll go from there.
Sweet. So yeah, I guess most people these days would sort of know me in and around the Bitcoin space, but I guess prior to Bitcoin, and probably for most of my life, I was more entrepreneurial in terms of background. So ever since I went to uni, I was really academically strong back at school, and my core subjects of strength were physics, math, chemistry, and all of that. So I ended up doing engineering, but I dropped out of uni because I wanted to, how can I say, make my millions by the time I was 20. And I put my scholarship money on the stock market, thought I was a genius in 2007, and I got absolutely raped. And yeah, I was sort of right in the thick of the whole GFC stuff, and that put my life on a completely different track. I dropped out of uni. I had to start some businesses to dig myself out of the hole. And the hole I was in was quite deep. I was about 250 grand in debt by the time I started my 20s. And yeah, since then my life's sort of been this entrepreneurial journey of, starting different businesses, blowing some up, learning what not to do alongside what to do. I was an early gold silver bug sort of in the 2011, 2012 period because I guess what I saw during the GFC and, learning about the first rounds of, major QE at the time, it sort of put me down that rabbit hole. Unfortunately, when Bitcoin sort of came across my radar, I dismissed it as sort of, whatever, internet funny money. I'll stick with my gold and silver, my hard money, to my everlasting dismay, shame, and regret. But hey, after that, I kind of built a couple different businesses, some successful, some fucking complete disasters. And it was in sort of 2016 where I got Steve jobbed out of my tech company that I had built. So the board kind of pushed me out. And it was a mixture of sort of arrogance on my part and stupidity on their part and everything. So they ended up sort of taking over the company and, sending it down the toilet because they spent all the money too quickly. But, I was probably also a little bit of a immature tech entrepreneur at that stage. So we had our differences, but, at the time that was a really painful experience for me. But what was interesting was that it was the catalyst for me to rediscover Bitcoin. And yeah, from there, as I, looked at Bitcoin, I was like, holy shit, this thing's still around. What the hell is going on here? I started digging, and the more I dug, the more I found something that aligned with me, not only, I guess, philosophically, but, morally, idealistically, the way it aligned with so many of my core values around, non-intervention, around voluntarism, around, individual responsibility, individual sovereignty, around, getting the idea of getting the government and all of this shit out of the fucking way. So all of this stuff really, over time aligned with me. And yeah, I very quickly, I guess you call it, became a Bitcoin maximalist, not through peer pressure. Like, I found my way there. Then I found Bitcoin Twitter. And there was a couple articles, I think, which sort of put me on the map. I think the two were, I wrote this one called Homo sapiens, evolution, money, and Bitcoin. And I made the argument that Bitcoin as an invention started 70,000 years ago. And I kind of took people through an anthropological journey of how human society evolved, and how money was the tool that actually enabled human society to increase in complexity. And it was that one, and then also where I wrote Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash. It was like sort of the definitive guide. So for those who know Murad Mahmudov's work, the Lindy effect chart and sort of Bitcoin's evolution as a store of value, media exchange, and all that. So he based that off that article actually, where I created this pyramid of importance with respect to how Bitcoin should evolve, or not how Bitcoin should evolve, but how Bitcoin will evolve in line with how natural systems evolve. So yeah, that was I guess that was where I kind of first landed on the map. And alongside that time, I had the early ideas for Amber, and here we are a couple of years later.
Walk us through real quick what Amber is, when you got started, and kind of where it's at today.
So Amber's really simple idea, which is a Bitcoin accumulation product. So we were the first DCA product in the world. There's a series of others these days, whether it's Swan or River, and there's a couple others in Europe and stuff like that. So we were sort of the first ones to build a product that enabled users to effectively accumulate Bitcoin. That was the whole point. Is I wanted to help people buy Bitcoin in a simple and easy fashion, and having learned through errors over the years, like when I think about all the time and energy I wasted trading derivatives and every single financial product you can think of, if all I did was just put $10 a week aside into Amazon, I'd be a millionaire. But no, I thought I was a genius. I thought I would outsmart the market. I thought all this fucking bullshit. And maybe of all the trading I've done over the last 10, 12, 13 years, I might be, if I'm lucky, even. Whereas all I had to do was put $10 a week aside. So I wanted to build a product that did that, particularly for Bitcoin, because I think the most important thing any individual can do for their future selves and for their kin is to collect Bitcoin. And that's effectively what the app does. So, we sort of started it, like I raised capital in 2018. We went right through that bear market and all that sort of shit. It was really difficult. And in all the experiences that I had in the past, I think, I can see one of the guys in the chat mentioned Shark Tank in Australia, and yeah, I was on Shark Tank in a prior business, and it was an interesting experience for me, because at that time I was sort of this young entrepreneur. I learnt the difference between raising capital versus the entertainment value in a show, like all the stuff that I had said prior to going into the Shark Tank and out of the Shark Tank was actually pre-recorded. So they coached me on what to say. So I looked like an even bigger fucking fool. And, obviously, as the media does really well, is I was in there for about an hour and 20 minutes. I think they only, cut down to 15 minutes, and they showed like the most embarrassing parts. So, I learned through the school of hard knocks with all of that stuff. But, throughout my life, I've picked up experience from all these areas, and I think that really helped me carry Amber through the bear market in particular, because I was raising capital when idiots, like I was raising capital for equity in a real business, whilst idiots were raising millions of dollars for fraudulent token sales for fucking toasters on a blockchain or whatever other ridiculous dumbass ICO there was. And it was hard for us to raise capital. And we raised a fraction of what these ICOs raised by selling our company, whereas these guys didn't sell anything except the fucking promise, a pipe dream on a white paper. And they raised millions. They're all bankrupt today. We are still here with a product delivering what we originally promised on. And I think, I kind of credit that to all of the trials and tribulations that I'd been through in, the prior chapters of my life. So to answer your original question, where we are now is, we're fully functional in Australia. We're we are the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Australia. Next steps for us is to enter the US market. Then we'll look at entering the UK, Europe, and we'll start to sort of expand our presence around the world. And, the mission is still the same from day dot, which is to enable the easiest way, to enable a mechanism for people to accumulate Bitcoin in the easiest way possible. And that's it.
Yeah. So Alex Fetsky, the CEO over at Amber. If you have questions or comments, feel free to jump in. We'd love to get your all's thoughts. I already see Asim and Radu, Katrina. How you guys doing? Lance, thanks for jumping on. If you have a comment or question, feel free to do so. We'll pull those. It's interesting. I talk to people a lot about Bitcoin, and I feel like it's a progression. I think some people may adopt it a little bit quicker than others, like personally, but I feel like just kind of going through my journey, it's a couple steps. So, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but maybe the first one would be speculation, where you can kind of see, like, I see a lot of people saying, looking at Bitcoin as like this vehicle to get more fiat. Like, hey, I'm going to buy Bitcoin as the asset, then I'm going to wait till it doubles and then just take my fiat out. And now I have two times as much fiat. So I feel like that's number one, speculation. Number two, maybe is like the hedge or like part of a portfolio allocation. That's kind of maybe the second step. And then the third step is your unit of account. And when I tell people that's how I see Bitcoin, I get a lot of weird looks. Like, what are you even talking about, unit of account? I'm like, when you go through these progressions and you get to the third step, you really stop seeing dollars. You stop seeing fiat, and all you see is sats. And I know that. And I know some people are like, well, I'm not level 3, like I'm just learning and all that. But I do feel like, what do you think about that progression? Because that's like over the years for me, that's kind of how I've went through it.
I think that's true. So there's two things I'll mention here. Is number one is like today, I can't remember if I said this somewhere or if I read this somewhere. But anyway, actually, yeah, sorry. I said it in one of the Telegram groups. Was my net worth went up today because I measure my net worth in Bitcoin. So I actually bought more Bitcoin today. And people are sort of like, oh yeah, my net worth went down today. It's like, no, I fucking didn't, because I'm not measuring. Like, I've actually got more Bitcoin today than I did yesterday. And that's exactly what I'm measuring. And for me, my net worth has just been consistently going up because I'm consistently collecting Bitcoin. So I think that when you finally get to stage 3, it's like, the price of Bitcoin doesn't even mean shit anymore, except that whenever you come across some fiat, you're able to convert that fiat into more Bitcoin if the price is lower, which is, always a good thing. Like, I actually enjoy it when the price of Bitcoin is lower, because I can exchange more of the shit fiat that I have with someone on the other side who's willing to give me their Bitcoin for like this worthless fake government money. So I'm always thankful for that. But to your point about the progression, I think that is quite true. So I've got a saying which most people know from my Twitter tweets and podcasts and stuff, which is, I came for the money and I stayed for the money. And what that means is basically what you described is, I came to sort of speculate and to make some money. But as I discovered what this is, I realized that, no, holy shit, the most important thing happening in the world today is the demonopolization of money, is the ripping out of the hands of any institution, any government, any central bank, any individual, any organization whatsoever, ripping the capacity for any of them or any of us, anyone, anywhere, to print money. That is the most important thing happening. So it's the separation of money and state. And for me, that's what sort of kept me here, and what's allowed me to dig deeper into Bitcoin. And what's really, out of all the topics that I'm involved in, like, for those who know my, podcasts and stuff, like I go into some really crazy topics, like whether it's religion or philosophy. And I just did one with Jean-Francois Garipé, who wrote The Revolutionary Phenotype, which is basically, I would say, probably the most important work on biology since, Dawkins' selfish gene, maybe even since Darwin's, natural selection. So it's like, I go into all sorts of stuff, but for me, the all-encompassing topic is like Bitcoin, because it just keeps sucking me in, because it touches on all of these areas that I'm interested in, and it aligns so strongly with the core values that I have as a human being, and as a quote-unquote sovereign individual. So yeah, I think that progression is important. And I think the journey from, coming in and looking at it as a speculative way to make money, and then sort of staying in it as, this is the money that I've now adopted and that I'm measuring, my productive capacity in, really depends on how, what seeds have been planted along the way. So I was lucky enough to have lost everything in the marketplace. In the global markets in 2007, 2008. I started developing a really healthy distaste for government, for intervention, for QE, and all of that sort of stuff at an early age. In my really early 20s. I started off as an entrepreneur, so I became extremely responsible. Like, I never had a paycheck. Like, one thing that, literally until recently, over the last year and a half or 2 years, where Amber's, started making money, where I've actually started drawing a salary. I've never had a salary in my entire life, ever. I never knew what a salary felt like, because if I made money, and in some businesses I made money, in some businesses I fucking lost everything. So there's been periods where I was eating cans of tuna and fucking one can of tuna a day for a whole week. There's been periods where I've been doing really well. So I've always had this sort of tumultuous existence, because I've always chosen the path of responsibility, and for me that was a real primer as well about Bitcoin, because I call Bitcoin the renaissance of responsibility. We live in a world today of complete dependency on the state, dependency on supply chain, dependency on all sorts of shit, and that creates a very fragile world and a very fragile existence, where if something cracks or something pops, everything else starts to break down. Whereas living a life of responsibility actually gives you true freedom, true choice, true capacity to be sovereign, true capacity to make decisions. Those early seeds for me, I think, helped me really adopt and embody the idea of Bitcoin quicker than maybe most. And I think that, but even irrespective of that, I still had to go through the journey. So I think the journeys are spot on.
Yeah, I think also too, I think it's a blessing if you had money in the market in 2008. I really believe that. Pretty similar to what you're mentioning. My story is, my stepdad made me open up a Roth IRA, retirement account, when I was, because that's what we call retirement accounts here in the US, but he made me open it up when I was 18. And then just a few years later, here it is, half of it's going, it's down 50% because of the GFC, right? But that's when you learn your lessons. Like, that's because it forced me to ask, why is this happening? Like, what is going on? As you were mentioning, right? So to kind of find some meaning. So now I guess some of the unfortunate side of it is, I heard about Bitcoin like 2012 or 13, but I feel like the very first time you hear about it, and a lot of people say this, people ignore it typically, like the very first time, unless maybe a cryptographer, like you really just understood the technology like inside and out, like initially. Like, so for me, my cousin told me about it in 2012, 13. I'm like, I don't know about that. And then 2016, being around like the financial markets, and like I've always been fascinated with charting and things like that. And you see an asset that's hit the high like 1,200, and then it consolidated for 3 years, and all of a sudden it's retesting those $1,200 highs from 2013 and 2017. The ETF talk and all that. So it's very interesting just from a charting perspective. Like, wow, this asset consolidated for 3 years, and now it's retesting those highs. Like, it was just interesting. So that's when I started following it more price action wise, but then still ignored it, and didn't even have, any kind of amount in it, that was significant until China banned exchanges. And then it crashed from like 4,800 to 3,500 that night. I'll never forget that night. It's down 30%. I guess there's no, it's better time than those corrections. It was like the fourth correction during that cycle. So really, but even then 2017, as I mentioned earlier, it was more speculation. It wasn't until like 2018, 2019, like when you really dig deep, and that's what pulled me down the progression even more, to see it as not just a hedge, but portfolio allocation. And then I feel like the kicker, I read Bitcoin Standard, and I mean, there's so much great content that's been put out over the last 2 or 3 years, especially. But then obviously 2020 happened, and then we had the capitulation, and that really, I think 2020 in March, I'd love to get your take too, but in March, the lowest buy I got in March of 2020 was at 4,500. I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget it. Because it was like one of those moments, like either I feel like you were on the edge. Like if you didn't quite believe in Bitcoin, you probably got out because you panicked, or you were buying because you knew what asset you had, So like, I didn't bottom tick at all, right? I didn't get the 3,900s, I wish, but but just, it was that conviction, and anything that you're putting value into, your conviction is going to get tested.
Yeah, so two things on that. I think you mentioned, if you're a cryptographer or engineer and all that sort of stuff, you understand the technology, you're likely to get it. I actually would push back on that. I think those people are least likely to get it, and those people are most likely to become shitcoiners and create their own chain. and start doing that. I think to really appreciate Bitcoin, you need to have, and me and Giacomo Zucca talked about this on a podcast. If anyone's interested, episode 25 of the Wake Up podcast. But we discussed that on there, and we sort of he put together a model like a Venn diagram, which is you need to understand technology well enough. You need to understand ethics, morality, libertarianism and stuff well enough, and you need to understand economics and monetary history well enough. And somewhere where those sort of three disciplines overlap, there's a Venn diagram in the middle where you're a Bitcoiner. Now, when any two of those sort of overlap, you're either a gold bug, a shitcoiner, something else, whatever. But I think that the Bitcoiner Venn diagram is really rare, and it requires quite a broad general understanding of a series of topics. And that's why I think the greatest thinkers in this space are people like your Breedloves and your Saifedeans and your Michael Goldsteins and your Pierre Richards and all of that, because they're broadly capable enough across a bunch of different disciplines. And they found the essence of all of those. And that's what Bitcoin seems to reward, not the techies or not just the pure monetary guys, because there's so many Austrian economists and libertarians, like, for the life of me, I don't understand how the fuck they don't get Bitcoin. Like, I call them the battered women of, politics, because, like libertarians especially always cracks me up. They're always talking about how dumb the state is and that the state needs to get out of the way and all this sort of stuff, but they don't do anything about it. Like Bitcoin, here's Bitcoin as a tool to to enable the dream that libertarians have always had, but they don't fucking adopt it. Like it's insane. So I think that's sort of one thing I just wanted to put forward there. Your other question about the conviction and March. So I actually remember March quite distinctly. I was in Berlin. I had been kicked out of my Airbnb because some cranky fucking old bag of a neighbor got annoyed because apparently my speaker was too loud, and the Airbnb host kicked me out of the apartment the night before, so I had to check out that day. And as I'm checking out, like I'm sort of in this foreign country. I was supposed to fly out, but my flight got canceled because all the corona bullshit happened. Like it was just this sort of tumultuous thing. And that morning, like Bitcoin's fucking crashing, and I'm sitting there outside in the foyer of this old ass building trying to get Wi-Fi at the door because the cleaner's in there. He's like, look, you can't stay in here, you got to get out. And I'm sitting there trying to like buy fucking Bitcoin. And at the same time, like, because I had one of the things I do is I never sell my Bitcoin, so I always just draw a little bit of US dollars against it through Unchained Capital. So at that time, my fucking loan went into margin, so I almost got liquidated, almost lost a bunch of my Bitcoin through Unchained. So I'm sitting there like trying to buy more Bitcoin and at the same time move Bitcoin from my ledger and my Trezor to get it over to Unchained to like to consolidate the loan and all this sort of shit. But I don't have internet access, and this guy's telling me to get out of the fucking apartment, and like it was just this chaos, absolute chaos of the day. And I got within 60 seconds of losing half of my Bitcoin being liquidated that day, because I had to go drive to the shopping center somewhere to get internet access to move every last bit of Bitcoin I had from my ledgers, from my Trezors, from my different exchanges that I just bought, like, getting money shuffled and all this sort of stuff. And I just fucking made it. And, luckily on that day, I ended up with more Bitcoin than I had, but I came that close to basically losing most of my stack, just because like it was just an awkward day. Like if it had happened one day earlier, I would have been at home, with Wi-Fi, and I would have been able to do all that stuff. But it was just a classic, one of the Alex Svetsky stories of shit hitting the fan. But yeah, I mean that for me, like I was like a pig in shit in the sense that I couldn't believe people were just dumping this thing. Like I was like, what the fuck is wrong with everyone? And I was
Oh,
I
go
wish I
ahead.
had more cash, basically. I just wish I had more cash that day. That's
I'll be honest too. I wish I was more liquid at the time. It was just like you just said. It was like the way that things just lined up. I was just not as liquid as I wanted to be. Like I got some 4,500, but like I obviously wanted more. But I think a lot of people were like just a crunch, just in that, just the way it ended up working out. Everyone personally is in a different situation. But yeah, I mean, if, for those that may not know or may not be following, Bitcoin within 2 days went from 9,000 to 3,800, 3,900 back in mid March. But just a point to make to that too, just because this gets brought up a lot. Like what happened in March? Like I know in like clubhouse rooms, people ask a lot of times, well, what happened to Bitcoin in March and everything else. But obviously, really every asset in the world got crushed, right? Because it was a flock from assets into the dollar, just to kind of give, I mean, the dollar was the only thing that spiked. So it was, and people getting margin called and everything else, and not having enough collateral to post, things like that. So then you had, if you look at the Dixie chart, the DXY, the dollar spiked, and there really has been in a downtrend ever since March. But that's essentially what happened. It wasn't so much like a fundamental thing that people were selling their QQQ, they were selling their SPY or selling Bitcoin. It was literally like they had to sell for collateralization and things like that. It was just a cascade effect. Just kind of give some color to maybe some people that may not follow.
That's the fragility. That's the fragility of global markets at the moment. Is that everything is so extended that. So I would argue that there was some fundamental stuff there, which is people actually freaked out about what the fuck does this virus mean and what the hell do these lockdowns mean. So everyone shit their pants, but the markets collectively overreacted because everything is so stretched so finely that everyone basically got margin called across almost every single asset, and it precipitated into one of the most major flash crashes we've ever seen. Like that was insane.
Yeah, I want to go deeper on a couple other things. I do want to grab a couple of questions, guys. I'm sorry I didn't grab these earlier. So Lance, thank you so much for jumping in with a question. So Alex, do you see institutional investors in Australia coming into your platform as a hedge or portfolio allocation? You're already shaking your head no.
No, we're a retail product, man. Like we're not going to service the those guys have multiple other options. Like we're here to help the little guy set up, whether it's with Pay ID or direct debit or EFT or credit card or Apple Pay or debit card or whatever. Like we just want to make acquiring and accumulating Bitcoin simple for everyday people. But absolutely no interest in servicing the instos.
Yeah, and to that point, I've also referenced Bitcoin as a savings technology, and I'm sure I saw that from Pierre Richard or someone else writing. But if you look at it more like people look at a mindset of a 401k, kind of a set it and forget it. Like I had a conversation. Somebody took me out to lunch this earlier today, and they were asking about like kind of how do you see Bitcoin? And like initially, I'm like, hey, look, just see it as like a savings technology. Like I put a lot of my value, and I don't mind saying it, right around 75% of my net worth is. Because and the other 25 is a lot of like my personal home that I haven't been able to get equity out of, right? So, but I've done it over the last especially 2 years because it's my value, and no one can do anything to it, like with Bitcoin, right? And that's what I was telling today. Like no one can inflate on it. No one can inflate my value away when I have it in cold storage. You can't do anything to me, to my sats. Like I dictate if my sats go up or down based on my decision, not 9 people making a decision to inflate away my value. So ultimately, that's like the crux as to why, like I've, over the years, I've went from speculation to the unit of account that really seeped into my brain like last year,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Bitcoin, like all of these things that we've sort of created over the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 decades are basically, mechanisms for people desperately trying to figure out a way to preserve wealth for the future because the savings don't exist anymore. You can't save. Like the entire system is deranged, and it rewards 2 things: consumption and a blind chase for yield in a desperate bid to preserve and somehow generate wealth quicker than what you're losing it as in cash. So it's like it is so fundamentally wasteful. It is stupid. It is a gross misallocation of assets. When, you know, like, and it really dawned on me a couple of years ago. I was sitting at a cafe with my mum, and she's like, you know, she's been working all her life, and particularly over the last 5-6 years, like, you know, she saved up something like 50 grand or whatever it was, and she's sitting there saying, "What do I do with my money?" She's like, "You know, I don't know anything about the markets." She goes, "I don't want, like, I'm too, you know, your brother, like, my brother's a trader, and, you know, fucking, like, I'll call him a gambler. He's an idiot. You know, he's saying, oh, I should give him the money and he should trade it." But she goes, "Last time I gave him the money, he lost it all." She's like, "I don't want to leave it in the bank because, you know, that I'm not earning anything." She goes, like, "I don't know." And I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, fucking hell, imagine working your ass off for years, like your entire life, and not knowing what the fuck to do with your money because it's going to just melt. It is criminal. And that's what pisses me off. It's like Bitcoin does away with all of the crap that we've sort of built around it, whether it's superannuation or 401ks or these fucking EFTs and ETFs and blind chasing yield and all this crap. It does away with all of that, all of it, because it's unnecessary. It's not needed for society to function. What's needed for society to function, and what's at the very foundation of civilization, is the capacity for an individual to perform work and to save, and then in the future use those savings for something that they want to acquire or to invest in. Simple as that. And we don't have the savings function in society today, and as a result, we are blind fucking consumers, and we're investing in shit that doesn't matter, and we're creating bubbles across every single asset class, and we're wondering why the world is so fucked up at the moment. So I think Bitcoin does away with all of that stupidity, and I just find that extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily interesting.
Yeah, I think about Thayer's law a lot, about kind of what's happening. It's this slowly then suddenly, obviously, is the meme in the Bitcoin space, but for someone that may not know, but Thayer's law is like good money driving out bad money concept. And I think about that a lot. It's happening slowly, obviously. It depends on who you ask what slowly is, I guess. But suddenly, people are going to want a better money. As everything, like you said, I think that sums it up. And I just feel it's just who gets the information first. I know it sounds silly, maybe. It's just how I look at it. It's the information asymmetry as to what Bitcoin is. And you look at history, whoever adopts the more sound money first wins.
Correct.
When you look at history.
Well,
so I don't know if you can talk about that.
Well, money represents the productive capacity of a society. Simple as that. So you know, so like, we perform work, we trade our two scarce resources, time and energy, for something that we can measure it in. So, you know, like we need to measure the productive capacity of each human being. And we do that with this technology called money. And like, money is a meta idea that has existed since the beginning of time. And, you know, like I said, I discussed it in that article that I wrote a couple of years ago. So, of course, the more money the more the tool or the object or the technology we use maps to the meta idea of money, the more functional society is, and the more society can actually build real wealth. And this is something, like, I always use the example of the Spaniards in the 1300s and the 1400s, the 1500s. So these guys, even on a gold standard, they conflated the idea of money with the idea of gold. And what they did is they actually hyperinflated themselves on a gold standard. They went and they dug up all the fucking gold from South America and wherever else they did, and they brought it all back to Spain, and they increased their supply of gold, and they crashed their own fucking economy because they conflated gold with money. Money, that doesn't matter how much of the object you create of money. If you're not increasing the productive capacity of society, you don't have more wealth. You know, wealth is something that we create through work. And that therein lies, like, one of the things that modern economists, modern economics, all this sort of shit just doesn't seem to understand. And it really is a 101 concept, is you create wealth not by fucking printing it, but by doing some sort of work and adding some sort of valuable input into society. And that, you know, Bitcoin is the apex money. It's the apex technology that can map as closely as possible to money because it is fixed, because it's open in nature, because it's voluntary in nature. And like you sort of said, good money pushes out bad, which is, that's for those who want to know, it's called Gresham's law. And I kind of call it more than just Gresham's law. I call it economic Darwinism. And I always use the example when I'm on Clubhouse chats, which is if you're going to work for a week at a cafe or whatever you're going to do, like you're going to work at your job for a week, and at the end of the week the employer turns around and says, yep, I'm going to pay you in salt or in toilet paper or in glasses or something. You're like, fuck off, give me the money. I want the money. And the reason you want the money is you demand the most saleable good, the one that is the most capable of storing value in a stable manner, the one that is able to be exchanged easily, the one that you can measure other goods and services in, i.e. the unit of account function. Nothing can compete with Bitcoin's capacity to perform those three functions of money, because nothing scores a 10 out of 10 across all of the attributes of money: divisibility, portability, recognizability, fungibility, scarcity, and possibility to forge. Like nothing competes with Bitcoin on those attributes, and therefore in its ability to perform the functions of money. So what is going to happen over time, and it's not a matter of if, it's a complete matter of when, is who is going to decide to demand Bitcoin for their time, their energy, their services, and their products first. And I wrote an article about this mid last year called Bitcoin and Lockdowns, where I put forward a model for understanding hyper Bitcoinization and what the trend would look like. And I call it it's sort of it's a necessity curve. So on one side you've got curiosity, and then on the other side you have pain. And somewhere on the spectrum of curiosity to pain, people adopt Bitcoin. Now, if you're more curious, you're going to get into Bitcoin because you want to. If you're more ignorant, you're going to get into Bitcoin because you have to, because some sort of painful situation emerges that pushes you into it. Either way, you're going to get there. So the only choice is not, are you going to use Bitcoin? Because you will, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to. The only choice is when and on what terms are you going to use Bitcoin? So, yes, information asymmetry has something to do with it, but also so does, where you are, the life you've grown up in, how much personal responsibility you take, what your personal ideologies are, how your values hierarchy is, and all that sort of stuff really matters. Because if it, kind of maps closely to Bitcoin, then hey, you're gonna adopt Bitcoin before the other clown who believes in money printing and socialism and wealth distribution, all that sort of stuff. They're never going to get fucking Bitcoin, so they'll probably be the last to come on board. So I know there's a lot there. I don't know if there's any threads you want to pull on, but Bitcoin's going to happen whether people like it or not.
Yeah, and it's something I get a lot as I'm trying to orange pill people. My buddies for the past, especially I've been going hard the last 3 years, and poker games, stuff like that or whatever. And they've always gave me the weird looks, and 18, 19. And it's just funny how they don't come calling or come asking until it's over 20K. It's I just laugh at humans are very interesting about when people get interested in things. So I know you, that's a whole rabbit hole for you, and I totally get that. So I'm just kind of sharing that. But it's funny how it is. So one of the things that comes up is, well, Chris, how is it a store of value when it's so volatile? And I go down talking about price discovery and things like that. But actually I'm trying to learn better how to explain to someone when they ask me that. So what's kind of your explanation?
I use the pizza analogy. Is if you take a pizza and you start chopping it into parts, you're not creating more pizza. So if you have a slice of pizza and that is your proportion of the entire pizza, and there's no way to create another pizza, your proportion of the pizza always stays the same. And that is the definition of a store of value. It's the inability to change the proportion that any person owns of the whole. That is actually the definition of store of value. Price has nothing to do with store of value. It never has, it never will. So store of value is about proportionality to the whole. And this is where I think people, miss out on understanding why Bitcoin is a store of value. So when you have one Bitcoin, you always have 1/21 millionth of the entire supply. And there's, that is fixed, unchangeable, incorruptible. Whereas, if you have $1, you have no fucking clue how much of the total you have. So therein lies the store of value position for Bitcoin. It is a perfect store of value because you know your proportion in relation to the whole. The price of Bitcoin is got nothing to do with Bitcoin's store of value. It's only got something to do with people's relative perception of how they individually and subjectively value Bitcoin. And that has nothing to do with store of value. That's just just like my perception on, water versus maybe your perception on beer. They're two different things. You might like to drink beer. I like to drink water. That's perfectly normal. So that's sort of how I would describe it.
Yeah, it's just interesting, like just trying to sit down and talk with someone that's fairly new, kind of walking through. Obviously, it's a process. Like all of this, people obviously want things just like society. As a consumer mindset, they want it like that, and they want like the answer. But everyone has their own process into how they understand what Bitcoin is. The other thing, back to the volatility thing. It's interesting. I think if people would change their framework and instead of looking Bitcoin like BTC USD, where all they're seeing, these hyperbolic moves to the upside, and over time it's been a hyperbolic move over the last 11 years. Look at, if you flip it upside down, the dollar is crashing. If you completely inverse it, because visuals are powerful, and if you flip it around and then you say, wow, the dollar's crashing against this asset, right? And it's Bitcoin's, and everything's crashing against Bitcoin. So if people that are doing charts just flip the script on what you're looking at, and it's interesting how minds can play tricks on you, and how the human mind sees risk if something's going up. One of the hardest things to do is add to your winners. And some of the best, that's so true. Because it's a psychological FOMO to get out, to lock in something, when in fact, like for example, like angel investors, they have clauses to add on to companies as their valuation gets bigger. Like they're adding to their winners, or VCs or whatnot, is down and through downstream. So I think changing perspective as to like not just looking at Bitcoin versus the dollar or what it's done, but like flip it upside down. There's actually a website somebody built on Clubhouse. It's like that's satsUSD.io.
I think it's USDsat.com.
Okay, or something like that. But you can see it like priced in sats. So it's just absolutely crashing. So yeah, the volatility is a question obviously that comes up. But like you said, it's perspective.
Yeah, I would also add like the volatility question is just one of like, I always ask people, I'm like, okay, so how would you propose a new money goes from nobody to everybody holding it? And as soon as they, like, if they go down the path of saying, well, maybe we should just set the value. I'm like, well, then we're back at fiat money. So like, an organic money has to grow. And in order to get from nothing to something, that requires growth. And show me one thing on the planet, in the real world, in the fucking imaginary world, wherever, that grows in a straight line. Nothing, zero, doesn't happen. So, it's just, I mean, whenever I think of the volatility question, people, like when people talk about volatility, I'm like, man, there's not that, like, first of all, Bitcoin itself is not volatile. Bitcoin is the most stable network on the planet. The only thing that is volatile is people's subjective perception all around the world. And how many people are having deep conversations like this, where they're trying to understand money, where they're trying to understand, how society evolved, or fucking barely anyone. So realistically, how many people really get Bitcoin? It's only a few. So that means most people are just out there fucking gambling. So as a result, of course, there is going to be fluctuations in subjective valuation, because all the market represents is, a conglomeration of different people's perception of what this thing is valued to them subjectively. And that's what the market is showing. And all we're seeing in the rising relative price of Bitcoin is a growing proportion of individuals who understand that they will not swap their Bitcoin for any other inferior form of money. And as a result, there is less available for other people to buy or other people to gamble with. And we, it's just a good old investing 101 or economics 101 supply demand equation. And it's just sort of, once you've been around it for a little while, like these things just start to seem so simple. You're like, fuck, it's just funny watching people.
Yeah. So Katrina, yeah. Those are good points. So I'm going to grab a couple of things. So Katrina said it would suggest also looking at an allocation of Bitcoin as another asset in one's own wealth basket. In this case, there's a room for volatility and targeting risk-adjusted returns. Katrina, thank you for the comment. I did want to add to that, another, if you're talking to a portfolio manager or someone's like kind of looking at it through a finance lens per se, I guess, because there is like you talk about the Venn diagram, there is, I think, that one viewpoint, right? And it's interesting because, look, I get trolled by a lot of people on LinkedIn. I will not necessarily call them out right now. In some of these threads, man, that these fiat pushers, man, they're pretty good. There's some interesting people. But when I bring up that Bitcoin has the highest Sharpe ratio risk-adjusted returns over any 5-year period, they're like, they have nothing to say because they have all these metrics they want to throw out. And I say, hey, risk-adjusted any 5-year period, it has the highest risk-adjusted return, has the highest Sharpe ratio compared to any other asset class in the world. Real estate, gold, it's the highest. So the risk that you are taking to get the gains from that asset, it's the best ratio out there, right? But you don't hear that very much. It just fascinates me how you don't hear that. And it's but like the risk you're taking, you have the upside. So that's like the asymmetric. When someone says like asymmetric upside or asymmetric return, that's what people are talking about.
Yeah, I used that a lot back in the day. These days, I guess where I'm at on my journey, I guess the when you get to stage 3 of the progress that you're talking about, right? Sort of you come for speculation. What you're describing there, risk-adjusted returns and all that sort of stuff, is basically the stage 2. It's the hedge, right? You're adding it to your portfolio, and it's 100%. Sort of, I think it's definitely on that path. And I mean, it's a good argument for getting people to get some skin in the game, and I think that's a very valid point. But once you get some skin in the game, you quickly start to realize, assuming you continue digging and trying to understand Bitcoin, you quickly realize that even that doesn't matter. It's like the allocation. Like you start to measure your entire portfolio in Bitcoin. So when it sort of becomes the unit of account, you're like, everything else starts to become obsolete. And that's where people like one person who I called out in 2019 and just watched everyone sort of kiss his asshole was Raoul Pal. I can't stand that idiot. Like, I honestly cannot stand him. I've never been able to stand him. Long before he ever talked about Bitcoin, like he's just one of those clowns who failed at Goldman Sachs. Like, you have to be really dumb to fail at Goldman Sachs. But he then, went on to run a really, like a kind of like a service to tell people about the markets, and he's been wrong for fucking 10 years about how everything's going to crash. He was wrong even in March after the crash. Is like, oh yeah, this is never going to come back, doesn't matter how much they print, the stocks and nothing ever going to go up again. He was wrong again. The guy's wrong about everything. And he's a perfect example of someone who just doesn't get Bitcoin. So he kind of came at it from that angle of allocating some of your portfolio to it and all that sort of stuff. But clearly, because he doesn't understand Bitcoin, because he doesn't know how to think about Bitcoin as a money, despite having access to some of the best minds in the world about it, he's gone and assumed that it's just another asset in the basket. So henceforth, maybe I should also put my money into Ethereum, and I'm warming up to Ripple, and how about fucking Dentacoin or Dogecoin or whatever other bullshit he's going to think. So I think that's a good entry point. Allocating some of your holdings to Bitcoin. But if you sort of stay stuck there, you are 100% prone to end up adding pointless fucking garbage into your portfolio because you think there's some sort of, gain to be made by diversifying in crypto. And I think, each one has their danger. Speculation has their danger. The second part has their danger, but there's freedom and liberation in getting to the point where you understand Bitcoin as the unit of account, at which point all the other stuff starts to become irrelevant.
Yeah, and then obviously with what Tesla did, 1.5 billion on the balance sheet. I think there's 38 companies now with Bitcoin on their balance sheet in some form, and I could be wrong about that number. Look, that number is going to go up. It could be 100, 200 this year. I have no idea. I tell people that. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it just cracks me up. But, that's going to continue to happen because they have to. I think you mentioned earlier. It's not even so much like they want to. It's like they've been forced to. And the other number I want to bring up too is there's a lot of crazy numbers, obviously, but there's $20 trillion in negative yielding bonds. And my brain can't understand that. Like that's an actual number. And then, right now, Bitcoin's market cap is like 900 billion. But there's 20 trillion in negative yielding bonds, where essentially just a layman explanation, like I give the bank money, the bank gives me back less. It makes no sense to me, but it's because of the money printing, because it's being stuffed into bonds and it drives the yields down. So it's wild, like what's going on. And some of the numbers, it's really incomprehensible. As to
modern economics have no relationship to reality anymore. The whole thing's a fucking fairy tale, and everything's just made up, like literally made up. Like, what relationship does a negative interest rate have with reality? You can't have a negative time preference. It doesn't exist in reality. So all of this shit's just made up. And people are sort of telling me that, oh yeah, Bitcoin got made. It's like, no. It's like the framework and the paradigm you're living in is literally just the fucking fairy tale of people just making stuff up, and nothing makes sense anymore.
So I got a question for you. What's the biggest change Bitcoin has made you? Like, what's the biggest change that Bitcoin has brought to your life? Because we talked about that progression and everything you kind of went through, but like, what's kind of the biggest change? I've asked a few people this. I need to ask this more, but like, what has changed the most in your life because of Bitcoin?
So many things, man. It's propelled me to once again become like a lifelong learner. So I think I had this epiphany the other week when I was preparing for the podcast with Jean-Francois Garipé, the biologist, and I was like, fuck me, like I'm sitting there like studying his book and learning about the phenotypes and how DNA emerged from RNA and all this sort of stuff, and I'm like, I'm doing this sort of study of my own volition, whereas, back when I was a teenager, I would have had to be prodded at school to learn this shit. So I think much like the Renaissance, 500-600 years ago, there was this sort of, inspired class of people who were driven to learn about the world cross-contextually across so many different disciplines. So for me, I think one of the things that Bitcoin's inspired me to do is really become a broad kind of lifelong learner. My level of curiosity across different subjects is, gone through the roof. I think that's probably one big thing. Another big thing is it's made me really, it's made me a lot more frugal and a lot more discerning when it comes to spending of any sort. It's made me realize the futility of trying in any capacity as a central institution or anything to govern human action, human behavior, which is effectively, economic action. So there's sort of three high level things. And, maybe a fourth thing, as a realization and impact to my life, it's sort of made me realize that the current paradigm that we're living in with respect to, how human beings are governed and all of that is what I like to call an overlord subject relationship. Whereas, the mechanism that drives humanity forward is actually a customer service provider relationship, because that is additive in terms of its effect. Whereas the overlord subject relationship is deductive, because the overlord is always sort of stealing. And I think, things like democracy and all these sorts of ideas, all these politics have turned the world, which is fundamentally has sort of, been like civilization emerged through the capacity of individuals to trade amongst each other and add wealth, like make it cumulative. All these, institutions of governance that have emerged have basically been these parasites that have sucked, value out of the value creation chain amongst human beings. And for me, it's just really unveiled the fallacy around, any form of governance, any form of, control by human beings where where moral hazard and no skin in the game exists, which is basically, all the kind of regimes we're living under today, which are all self-funded by the capacity for a government or institution to print its own money and tax its populace, alongside all those other things. Like I said, being a learner, being more discerning about my spending, and just understanding the world in a more holistic, principled way. I think that's sort of the influences that Bitcoin's had on me.
Yeah, I think bottom line for me, it's the sooner you adopt a sound money, the sooner you're free. That's just how I've seen it. I mean, just in my personal journey, the past 2 or 3 years, and then it frees you to not have to be on the rat race that everyone talks about. It's not just Bitcoiners. Everyone talks about the rat race and trying to keep up and debt, and only have, half of America can't afford a $500 emergency and things like that. And but it's because they are on a fiat standard. Because there's other reasons, but this is kind of a broad statement, I guess. But if you are under a fiat standard, if you're under an unsound money, it's chasing after inflation. It's chasing, inflation is not 2%, it's 10% probably. Yeah, it might be 15% asset inflation. Yeah. So you're just chasing and chasing. So it's the rat race. So people have been saying it's a rat race for years, but some don't know the answer.
Yeah, like the reality is probably it's a rat race on quicksand.
Yeah,
and that's why everyone's losing.
Yeah. That's why everyone's losing. Because they're denominating their value in an unsound, inflated money. Mm-hmm. In the end, I mean, that's just how I look at it. And I feel like, and I'm not saying, some people might take a soundbite I just did and say, oh, well, if you said you're in Bitcoin, you'll be rich tomorrow. I didn't say that. But when you adopt a sound money over time, right? The time value, like over time, you're going to be in a better spot.
There is only one way to get, like, and I always talk about when people ask me, how does Bitcoin sort of fix the, world in terms of poverty and people who don't get a chance to get ahead and everything. I'm like, look, the only way for any human being to move forward is to build wealth. And the only way to build wealth is to trade something of value for money and be able to save for the future. If you can't save, you cannot build wealth, and you can never, ever, ever get out of the rat race. And that's what Bitcoin fixes, is Bitcoin allows us to once again build wealth as individuals because we can save. Saving comes before investing. You can't invest without having some mechanism for saving. And by fixing that, Bitcoin actually gives people the chance, should they want it, to get out of the rat race. Without Bitcoin, we will never get out of the rat race because, some few of us might be able to because we're able to add so much value, and that's fine. That's great, but by and large, most people just can't. They will be forever indebted, and they're forever sort of, running a rat race in quicksand that they can't get out of. So what we need to do is fix the ability and the capacity for individuals to save, because when individuals can save, they can actually, they can have a future. Without the ability to save, you can't do shit. And that's how Bitcoin fixes poverty. That's how Bitcoin gives people in, worse areas a chance to get ahead. Like imagine being in Venezuela and, doing the best work of your life, producing something really good. And then at the end of the week, what you earn is fucking worth 80% less. Why even try? Like, why even try? That doesn't work. Like, you have to be able to save in order to get ahead. And there's no point in even fucking trying if you can't get ahead. And, by fixing that, I think Bitcoin's second, third, and subsequent order effects fix a lot of other things in society.
Well, hey, we're up against the clock. Yeah, Alex, I appreciate sharing your experience. I do want to give you a quick moment. How can people get connected to you and learn more about Amber?
Sweet. So if I guess the easiest thing is I've got all my links on Twitter, but if you check out my Twitter at Alex Svetsky, AlexSvetski, or just chuck my name into Google, like all the stuff will pop up. You know, like my Twitter persona is a little bit more, how can I put it? Vicious, if that's a good word to use. You know, it's less characters and less time for me to, you know, explain my position, and I just beat the hell out of people. But if you want to sort of see the more well thought out version, there's the Wake Up podcast that I run. There is my blog as well. That's another one, svetsky.medium.blog. And then these days I'm trying to get on Clubhouse as much as possible to have these discussions with people on there.
Yeah, Clubhouse has been great. That's how actually, you know, we met and on some panels and stuff. So it was a lot. Clubhouse is awesome. If you want to learn more about just Bitcoin knowledge and people sharing experiences as well. And then I did read your article, I think back in November from Bitcoin Magazine, because Bitcoin is a necessity. Its economy will be circular. It was a great article. So I appreciate the content you put out. And we'll put your links in the description. We'll put the links at the beginning of the LinkedIn replay as well. A lot of people watch the replays. So make sure to check it out. So Alex, appreciate your time. Katrina, Radu, Lance, thank you all so much for jumping on. Will, Jason, a number of other people. Thank you all for the questions. And if there's other questions and you're rewatching, you can tag us and we'll be happy to answer those, you know, on the replay. So Alex, appreciate it, man. We'll have to do it again.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to everyone listening. Really appreciate it, guys.
I appreciate it. Take care.